At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. Not even in their dreams could the Demiurge have foreseen this day, when on the very anniversary of 100 years after their ancestors had denied a loan to a young emerging species from a distant planet called Earth, the human ambassador was back at the Galactic Bank, and Zirar of the Demiurge couldn't figure out what this human was up to. Zirar shifted uncomfortably on his hover disk, the anti-gravity device keeping him suspended behind his imposing desk at the perfect height to conduct business with larger species. His green skin had taken on an even deeper shade of irritation as he observed the human ambassador through narrowed eyes, his perpetual expression of displeasure more pronounced than usual. Being a typical demiurge, Zirar's entire diminutive body was roughly the same size as the human's head alone, yet he had learned long ago that size meant little when you controlled the galaxy's financial institutions. He folded his small arms across his chest and continued to study the human with growing unease, wondering what scheme this representative of the upstart species could possibly have in mind after a century of silence. The human ambassador sat calmly before the desk, short by his species standards, but still towering over Zirar. He was formally dressed in what appeared to be diplomatic attire, his brown hair neatly styled and his brown eyes meeting Zirar's gaze with unwavering confidence. Most remarkably, he seemed completely immune to Zirar's signature expression of displeasure, maintaining a composed demeanor that only served to deepen the demiurge's frustration. Zirar cleared his throat with all the authority his tiny frame could muster. So, Ambassador, he paused, realizing he hadn't caught the human's name, but pressed on regardless. What brings Earth crawling back to the Galactic Banking Consortium after a century of radio silence? The human smiled pleasantly. Oh, you know how it is. Time flies. Time flies. Zirar's green skin darkened another shade. That's your explanation. Things change, the ambassador added helpfully. Zirar's hover desk bobbed slightly as he leaned forward, his perpetual scowl deepening. Listen here, Ambassador. I don't run a charity operation. I am the chief loan officer of the most prestigious financial institution in 5-star systems. Now, I'll grant you that humanity has progressed since your ancestors' embarrassing loan rejection. Your species might even qualify for a modest credit line these days, but the paperwork alone would take months, and the interest rates. The human burst into laughter, a sound so unexpected that Zirar nearly fell off his hover disk. Oh, that's rich. Earth has more money than we know what to do with these days. We're definitely not here for a loan this time. Zirar's tiny eyes narrowed to pinpricks. Then what exactly are you wasting my valuable time with? Do you have any idea how many star systems are waiting for appointments? My time is worth more per minute than most planets' GDP. The human laughed even harder, wiping tears from his brown eyes. You really don't need to worry about the value of your time anymore, Zirar. You work for Earth now. The hover disk wobbled dangerously as Zirar processed this statement. What? Work for Earth? Have you suffered some kind of cranial trauma during your journey here? Not at all, the ambassador said, straightening his formal jacket with obvious amusement. Though I can understand the confusion. Confusion? Zirar sputtered. You march in here spouting nonsense about me working for your backwater planet and you call my reaction confusion? What in the sacred hells are you talking about? The human's grin widened. Well, Zirar, it's quite simple, really. Earth bought the Galactic Banking Consortium. For a moment, the office fell completely silent except for the gentle vibration of the hover disk's anti-gravity generators. Zirar's perpetual expression of displeasure transformed into something approaching bewilderment as his brain struggled to process what he'd just heard. Earth The same Earth that had been denied a loan for a few thousand credits a century ago? The primitive little rock whose representatives had been laughed out of this very office by his great-grandfather? That Earth had somehow acquired enough wealth to purchase the entire banking consortium? Impossible. Absolutely, categorically, impossibly impossible. His mind reeled as he stared at the calmly smiling human, waiting for the punchline to what had to be the galaxy's most elaborate joke. Zirar's hover disk dipped slightly as he struggled to regain his composure. "Proof," he said, his voice weak and confused. "I need to see proof of purchase, official documentation, authenticated transfers, something more substantial than the word of a human," the ambassador supplied helpfully, his brown eyes twinkling with amusement. "Speaking of which, I realize I haven't properly introduced myself. Ambassador Kent Beaumont, Earth's diplomatic team." He stood and extended his hand toward the diminutive demure. "Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Zirar." Zirar stared at the outstretched appendage as if it were a venomous space serpent. The human's hand was easily 3 times the size of Zirar's entire torso, the fingers thick and oddly pink-fleshed. The ambassador held it there patiently, that infuriating smile never wavering, while Zirar contemplated the bizarre ritual humans apparently called a handshake. After what felt like an eternity, Zirar's patience snapped. With a sharp motion, he slapped the offered hand away with both of his tiny green palms. "I don't care if you are the Emperor of the Andromeda Galaxy!" Zirar snarled, his hover disk bobbing indignantly. "Show me the proof!" Ambassador Beaumont chuckled and withdrew his hand without offense. "Of course, perfectly understandable given the circumstances." In a brief moment, he placed his briefcase on Zirar's desk. The case was larger than Zirar himself, forcing the demure to crane his neck to see over it. The first item Beaumont withdrew was a piece of parchment that looked ancient even by galactic standards. The material had a yellowish tinge, and as he unrolled it carefully, Zirar could see the distinctive tentacle marks that served as the Virak Emperor's signature. The swirling organic patterns were unmistakable, each curve and spiral unique to the Emperor's specialized appendages, impossible to forge due to the bioluminescent ink that only Virak royalty could produce. "His Imperial Majesty, Gorthnak the Ninth," Beaumont said conversationally, "was quite pleased to liquidate his species' assets. Apparently, they needed the capital for some rather ambitious terraforming projects in their home system." Zirar studied the document with the sharp eye of someone who had spent decades in galactic finance. The tentacle marks glowed quietly, the parchment bore the correct imperial watermarks, and the legal language was formatted according to Virak commercial law. "This appears legitimate," he admitted grudgingly. "But the Virak only own 9% of the consortium, hardly a controlling interest." "Ah, yes," Beaumont nodded, reaching into his briefcase again. "Which brings us to this." This time he withdrew what appeared to be a perfectly transparent crystal, roughly the size of Zirar's head. The geometric facets drank the office lighting and threw prismatic patterns across the walls. "The Celia technocracy's share, 41%, if memory serves." Zirar's green skin went pale. "They wouldn't! The Salir would never sell their banking interests. Their entire economic philosophy is built on maintaining financial stability across the galaxy. They've upheld those shares for over 3 millennia!" Despite his protests, he found himself accepting the crystal, surprised by its weight. "Well," Beaumont said cheerfully, "apparently even technocracies have their price." Zirar clutched the crystal and activated his hover disk, floating frantically around his office. "Where is it? Where is it?" he muttered, diving behind filing cabinets and rifling through storage compartments. "I know I have a Celir data reader somewhere in this chaos." His tiny form disappeared entirely behind a stack of loan applications before emerging triumphantly with an elaborate device that looked like a metallic flower with crystalline petals. "Aha! Third-generation Celir authenticity scanner. If this crystal is a fake, this will expose it immediately."
He inserted the crystals into the device's center, and the petals began to glow with gentle green light.
Numbers and symbols cascaded across the scanner's display in the flowing script of the Salir language. Authentic, verified, legitimate transfer of ownership. Zirar ran the scan again. Same result. A third time, adjusting the sensitivity settings and cross-referencing against historical data. The answer remained unchanged. This can't be! He slammed his tiny fist against the scanner in frustration, causing it to beep indignantly. Curse their leader's ancestors! Floating back to his desk with defeated reluctance, Zirar set the crystal down carefully. Fine. So Earth has, let me calculate, 49% of the consortium. Still not a majority stake. Ambassador Beaumont's grin widened as he reached for his briefcase a third time. About that. The datapad he withdrew was sleek and modern, its surface already glowing. As soon as Beaumont touched the display, a three-dimensional projection materialized above the desk. Not a hologram, but rather a sophisticated display of floating particles that created a perfect visual representation of recent events. The figure that appeared was unmistakably High Chancellor Vedtharion of the Galactic Council, a towering Briazi whose black scales were unmistakable. His red eyes burned intensely as his long, muscular tail swayed behind him. In the projection, he stood in what appeared to be a formal chamber on Earth, ornate human architecture visible in the background.
Citizens of the galaxy,
the Chancellor's deep voice resonated from the projection.
Today marks a historic moment in interspecies relations. The Galactic Council, in recognition of our substantial debt to the people of Earth, a debt accrued through their generous humanitarian aid during the plague years, hereby transfers full ownership of our combined 47% stake in the Galactic Banking Consortium to Earth's government, effective immediately.
Zirar watched in growing horror as the Chancellor's massive, clawed hand signed the transfer documents. The projection continued with the Chancellor's final words.
We are proud to call humanity our partners in this new era of galactic prosperity.
No! Zirar's hover disk spun in frantic circles as he performed rapid mental calculations.
Virac 9%, Salir 41%, Council 47%. That's 97%. But there are individual shareholders, small merchants, family trusts, investment groups scattered across.
Oh yes, Beaumont interrupted smoothly. We bought those out too. Turns out most were quite eager to sell once they heard about our acquisition plans. Something about preferring liquid assets to uncertain futures. He patted his briefcase fondly. I have all the documentation right here if you'd like to verify each transaction individually, though I warn you there are several thousand of them. The full scope of the disaster crashed over Zirar like a tidal wave of molten despair. His hover disk wobbled dangerously as the reality of his species' situation became crystal clear. The Demiurge had lost their homeworld centuries ago to a stellar catastrophe, a dying star that had consumed their entire system. The survivors had scattered across the galaxy, but the largest concentration had settled here, on this planet that housed the Banking Consortium's headquarters.
For generations, the Demiurge had built their lives around the institution. Hundreds of thousands of his people worked in every department: loan processing, investment analysis, interstellar currency exchange, risk assessment, fraud prevention. They had become the galaxy's financial experts by necessity, their small stature and analytical minds perfectly suited to the intricate work of managing vast economic systems. Without the bank, without these jobs, without this single planet that had become their unofficial new homeworld, where would they go? What would they do? The galaxy was not kind to refugees, especially small ones who could easily be overlooked or dismissed. Zerar's hover disk settled to its lowest altitude as the weight of realization pressed down on him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible.
Ambassador Beaumont, do you understand what this institution means to my people? Do you comprehend that you now control not just the bank, but our jobs and the entire future of the demure species?
Ambassador Beaumont's expression softened, and for a moment his diplomatic mask slipped to reveal something approaching genuine sympathy. Of course I understand, Zerar. The Galactic Banking Consortium isn't just your employer. It's your sanctuary, your new homeworld, the foundation upon which your entire displaced civilization has rebuilt itself. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle before his grin returned.
Which is exactly why humanity made sure to buy the planet, too.
Zerar's hover disk lurched so violently he nearly tumbled off.
You... what?
Beaumont was already reaching into his briefcase again, this time producing a document filled with official seals and signatures.
The Galactic Council is quite accommodating, actually. Apparently, when you owe someone enough money to fund a small galactic war, you become remarkably flexible about real estate transactions.
He unrolled the contract with a flourish.
One planetary deed, signed, sealed, and delivered. We now own everything from the molten core to the upper atmosphere, including all mining rights, territorial waters, and, oh, this is interesting, exclusive breeding rights to those adorable six-legged creatures in the southern continent. You bought the planet too?
Zerar repeated, his voice hollow, as if his brain had temporarily disconnected from his vocal cords. The full scope of humanity's acquisition crashed over him like successive waves of cosmic horror. Not only had they purchased the bank that employed his people, they had literally bought the ground beneath their feet. Every building, every street, every park where demure children played, all of it now belonged to Earth. The demure species had survived the destruction of their homeworld, scattered across the galaxy like seeds on stellar winds, only to find refuge and purpose here. And now, in the span of a single conversation, that refuge had been purchased out from under them by the same species their ancestors had once dismissed as primitive lone seekers.
Now then,
Beaumont said carefully, placing the planetary deed back in his briefcase.
Since humanity will be running things here from now on, I don't suppose you could give me a tour of our new acquisition. I'd love to see how the galaxy's premier financial institution operates on a day-to-day basis.
Zerar's mind raced as he considered his options. He could call his superiors, but what would he tell them? That their entire civilization was now at the mercy of the species they had once rejected? He could send a bank-wide announcement, but that would only create panic and chaos without achieving anything productive. No, there had to be a better way. Then, like a bolt of inspiration born from desperation, an idea struck him. He had spent his entire career defending the bank's interests, protecting its reputation, hiding its flaws from potential investors and regulators. But what if he did the opposite? What if, instead of making the bank look attractive, he showed this human every skeleton in every closet? What if he could convince Ambassador Beaumont that humanity had made a terrible mistake, that the Galactic Banking Consortium was actually a financial disaster waiting to happen?
A tour,
Zerar said slowly, his hover disk stabilizing as new purpose filled him.
Yes, Ambassador Beaumont. I would be delighted to give you a personal tour of our facilities.
Zerar's hover disk powered to life as he led the way out of his office, the ambassador's footsteps heavy behind him in the cold corridor. The demure tried to project confidence, but inside his anxiety was eating him alive like a parasitic organism. Every step brought them closer to his desperate gambit.
I thought we might start with our financial records department,
Zerar said, his voice carefully controlled.
I'm sure you'd like to examine our books, get a real sense of the bank's current situation.
Excellent idea, Beaumont replied cheerfully.
I do love a good balance sheet.
The journey through the bank's corridors felt interminable. Zerar's hover disk seemed to move through thick syrup,
each passing moment stretching into eternity. Other Demure employees they passed along the way nodded respectfully to Zerar, completely unaware that the tall human walking beside him now owned everything they held dear. The Financial Records Department occupied an entire floor of the bank's central tower, its walls lined with modern storage units containing centuries of galactic economic data. As they approached the main work area, Zerar could already hear the familiar sounds of his people at work. The gentle noise of calculators, the soft clicking of keyboards, the occasional muttered curse when numbers refused to balance. What he hadn't expected was the immediate reaction when they entered the room.
Zerar!
Called out Keth, a young analyst whose hover disk was barely long enough for his enthusiastic gestures.
What's the human doing here? Don't tell me Earth is trying to get another loan?
The comment sparked a ripple of laughter throughout the department.
Yeah,
added Mira from her workstation.
tell him we still have the rejection letter from a century ago, framed in the back room. Oh, this is precious,
chimed in Vorth, the department's senior calculator.
Maybe they've finally saved up enough credits to afford our minimum loan amount.
The laughter grew louder as more Demure joined in the impromptu roasting session. Zerar felt his green skin turn several shades paler as he watched his colleagues unknowingly insult their new boss. The hover disk beneath him began to wobble as stress-induced vertigo set in. Ambassador Beaumont, however, seemed delighted by the reception. He threw back his head and laughed heartily. Well, I can see why Earth has such a reputation for being friendly. Your staff certainly knows how to make a human feel welcome. The casual way he delivered that line, treating outright mockery as hospitality, sent Zerar into an internal panic spiral. Was the ambassador being sarcastic? Was this some form of diplomatic threat? Were they all about to be fired, or worse, exiled from the planet they could no longer call home?
That's enough!
Zerar snapped, his voice firm.
You are all behaving this way because you don't understand how much money humans have these days. Show some respect to our guest.
The room fell silent immediately. The Demure exchanged confused glances, unsure what had gotten into their usually mild-mannered superior, but they returned to their work without further comment. Zerar led Beaumont deeper into the department, toward a corner workspace where Lavir sat hunched over a massive pile of debt assessment reports. Unlike most Demure, Lavir worked without a hover disk, preferring to remain grounded while he wrestled with the galaxy's most challenging financial calculations.
Lavir,
Zerar called out,
I'd like you to meet Ambassador Beaumont from Earth. Ambassador, this is Lavir, our senior debt analyst.
Lavir looked up from his work, revealing the tired eyes of someone who spent far too much time staring at numbers that never seemed to add up correctly.
Earth?
He glanced between Zerar and the human.
Are we finally writing off that old loan application as a bad debt? Actually,
Zerar said, his heart racing as he prepared to spring his trap.
The ambassador was interested in seeing some of our more challenging accounts. Perhaps you could show him the Lavarian debt situation.
Lavir's expression shifted from casual interest to professional dread.
Oh, you want to show him that mess?
He gestured to a holographic display that materialized above his desk, showing numbers so large they required scientific notation.
Ambassador, I hope you have a strong stomach for financial horror stories.
The display showed a debt total that made even Zerar wince. 1.47 quadrillion credits, accumulated over 3 centuries of missed payments, penalty fees, and compound interest. The Lavirians, as a species, had essentially borrowed enough money to fund a small galactic war, and then proceeded to default on every single payment.
The Lavirians,
Zerar began, warming to his theme with the desperate enthusiasm of a salesman trying to return a defective product,
are perhaps the most financially irresponsible species in the known galaxy. They borrowed this money to fund their Great Warrior expansion. Essentially, they wanted to conquer nearby star systems for the glory of combat. When that failed spectacularly, leaving them with nothing but debt and wounded pride,
They decided that paying back loans was dishonorable and unbefitting true warriors.
Zerar's hover disk bobbed with agitation as he continued his elaborate condemnation.
They've turned financial default into a cultural virtue. Their children are taught that owing money is a sign of strength. It means you were bold enough to take risks. They've weaponized bankruptcy, Ambassador. They actually celebrate each missed payment as a victory over a weak merchant thinking. And their leader, Prime Minister Gorak the Unconquerable, once declared that repaying debts was for species without fangs. The man literally burned our debt collector alive in a ceremonial fire and broadcast it across their planetary networks.
Ambassador Beaumont listened to this tirade, occasionally nodding or making thoughtful sounds. After what felt like an eternity of Zerar's increasingly frantic explanations about Laverian financial irresponsibility, the human finally spoke. Interesting. Do you think I could give their Prime Minister a call? Zerar and Lavir exchanged a meaningful look, the universal expression shared by financial professionals when a client was about to do something monumentally stupid. But Zerar quickly recognized this as the perfect opportunity to demonstrate just how hopeless their situation truly was.
Of course!
Zerar practically launched himself from his hover disk in his eagerness to retrieve a communication device.
Let me get you a diplomatic pad. You'll see for yourself just how unreasonable these creatures can be.
Moments later, the holographic display activated, revealing the imposing figure of Prime Minister Gorak the Unconquerable. The Laverian leader was every bit as intimidating as his reputation suggested. Nearly 3 meters tall, with blood-red scales covering his muscular frame, and 4 arms that looked capable of crushing starship hulls. His yellow eyes held the sharpness of a predator who would never back down from a fight in his life.
What is it?
Gorak's voice rumbled like distant thunder.
I am in the middle of the blood ritual for my youngest son's warrior certification, and if this is another pathetic demand for...
He stopped mid-sentence as he focused on the screen.
Kent? Kent Beaumont? Is that you?
Zerar's jaw dropped so hard he nearly dislocated it. The terrifying war leader's expression had transformed from menacing fury to genuine warmth in the span of a heartbeat.
Gorak,
Beaumont replied with equal enthusiasm.
How are you, old friend? How did Thrax's blood baptism go last year? I still have the ceremonial blade you sent as a thank you gift.
It went beautifully. He earned 5 new honor scars and only cried twice, and little Vrem is finally ready for his own ceremony. That's what we're preparing for now. But Kent, my brother in battle, what brings you to contact me during such an auspicious time?
Zerar felt his carefully constructed reality beginning to crumble as he watched this impossible conversation unfold. The most financially irresponsible leader in the galaxy was chatting with the human ambassador like they were old drinking buddies.
Well, Beaumont said casually, I wanted to let you know that humanity has purchased the Galactic Banking Consortium. We're the new owners as of this morning.
You bought the bank?
Gorak's laughter could probably be heard on neighboring planets.
Can't you, magnificent warrior? I always knew Earth would conquer those green-skinned number crunchers eventually. This calls for celebration.
Actually, Gorak, I was wondering, since we're friends and all, do you think the Laverian people might be able to settle their debt with the bank? You know, now that you technically owe the money to Earth.
Zerar held his breath, absolutely certain that this was the moment his plan would work. There was no way, absolutely no conceivable circumstance, under which the Lavarians would agree to pay their debt. Their entire culture was built around financial defiance. Gorak stroked his massive chin with one of his 4 hands, his expression thoughtful.
You know, Kent, that's actually a fair point. The Lavarians have never owed money to our friends before. It was always those arrogant demiurge bankers who treated us like we were beneath their notice. But Earth helped us during the plague years, sent medical supplies when no one else would. And you personally vouched for us when the Galactic Council wanted to impose economic sanctions.
I did what anyone would do, Beaumont replied modestly.
No, my friend. You showed honor when others showed only greed. Very well. Consider the debt paid. I'll transfer the funds immediately. It might take a few hours to liquidate some of our mining assets, but you'll have your money before the sun sets on Lavier Prime.
The communication ended, leaving the financial department in stunned silence.
Zerar stared at the display screen as if it had just shown him proof that mathematics itself had been fundamentally wrong all these years. Lavier's voice came out as a strangled whisper.
Sir, the payments just came through. 2 quadrillion credits. They included interest.
But Zerar barely heard him. His desperate plan to convince the humans that the bank was worthless had just backfired spectacularly. Instead of demonstrating the hopelessness of debt collection, he had somehow enabled the single largest financial recovery in the bank's history with a single call.
Well, Beaumont said cheerfully, shall we check on some of the other outstanding accounts?
The next hour passed in a blur of increasingly impossible debt collections. The Nadir hegemony, whose leaders had insisted for decades that their mineral-based physiology made them incapable of understanding primitive monetary concepts, suddenly discovered an urgent need to settle their accounts when they learned Earth now owned the bank. Their payment would arrive in the form of rare gems worth triple the original debt. The Nomadic Traders Guild, masters of legal loopholes who had spent 50 years arguing that their constantly moving fleets technically existed outside galactic jurisdiction, decided that friendship with humanity was worth more than their creative interpretations of commercial law. They transferred ownership of 3 entire cargo fleets as payment. With each successful collection, Zerar felt his sanity slipping away like water through his tiny green fingers. The numbers on the displays climbed higher and higher, reaching amounts that would have taken the bank decades to collect through traditional means. In a single afternoon, Ambassador Beaumont had recovered enough money to fund a small galactic empire. The commotion from all this unprecedented financial miracle had not gone unnoticed. As Zerar watched the latest payment confirmation scroll across Lavier's screen, the department's main doors burst open with enough force to rattle the quantum storage units. Director Verdor swept into the room like a green tornado, his hover disk spinning at speeds that violated several safety regulations. Behind him came Assistant Director Col Maven and Senior VP Rinthara.
Zerar!
Verdo bellowed.
What is happening down here? Our systems are showing debt collection numbers that look too good to be true.
Sir, I can explain,
Zerar began, but Verdor cut him off with an enthusiastic wave.
Explain, my dear Zerar. You don't need to explain, genius. In one afternoon, you've collected more outstanding debt than the bank has recovered in the past decade. The board is going to promote you. They're going to give you your own fleet of hover disks. They're going to name a moon after you.
The other executives crowded around Lavier's workstation, their eyes gleaming as they stared at the collection totals.
Magnificent!
Col Maven gushed, completely ignoring Ambassador Beaumont, who stood quietly to one side, watching the proceedings with a smile on his face.
Your debt analysis strategies have clearly reached a new level of sophistication.
Indeed,
Rinthara added, her hover disk performing what could generously be called a victory dance.
I always believed in him.
Zerar could only watch as his superiors continued to congratulate him and Lavier while treating Ambassador Beaumont as if he were an irrelevant piece of office furniture. The irony was so thick it could be cut with a plasma torch. Here were the highest-ranking members of an institution that now belonged entirely to Earth, and they were completely ignoring the representative of their new owners. As Director Verdor launched into an elaborate speech about showing those other species what the best financial minds of the galaxy could accomplish, something inside Zerar finally snapped. The stress of the day, the weight of the secrets he carried, the absurdity of watching his bosses unknowingly insult their new owner. It all crashed together in a moment of clarity.
Enough!
Zerar shouted.
You want to know how we collected all this debt? You want to know the secret behind today's miraculous financial recovery?
The room fell silent.
This human
Zerar pointed directly at Ambassador Beaumont.
owns the bank. He owns this building. He owns this planet. He owns everything we have. Earth bought the Galactic Banking Consortium this morning, and they bought our world along with it. There's nothing to be happy about. We work for him now. We all work for him.
The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to create its own gravitational field. Director Verdor's hover disk slowly descended until it was on the ground. Cole Maven's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror in the span of a few seconds. Rinthara actually turned completely around, as if she could somehow reverse time by spinning in a circle. "He's telling the truth," Ambassador Beaumont said quietly, "and I was the one who made those calls. Turns out, friendship and an arsenal of antimatter bombs opens a lot of doors that traditional debt collection can't touch." The reality began to sink in like a slow-acting poison. The Demiur had once been the galaxy's financial power brokers, the species that controlled credit and currency across most star systems. They had built their new civilization on the foundation of economic expertise, becoming indispensable to galactic commerce after losing their homeworld. And now, in a single day, they had fallen from the top of the economic hierarchy to what? Employees? Tenants? The property of a species they had once dismissed as primitive?
The loan!
Verdor whispered.
This is about the loan we denied them a century ago. They've been planning this,
Cole Maven added, his voice hollow.
100 years of preparation, all leading to this moment. The greatest fall in galactic history,
Rinthara muttered.
From financial overlords to...
She couldn't finish the sentence. None of them could. Ambassador Beaumont watched their existential crisis unfold for several long moments before throwing back his head and laughing. Not the cruel laughter of a conqueror, but the genuine amusement of someone who found the situation absurdly funny. "Oh, for crying out loud," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Look at your faces. You'd think I just announced the end of the universe. Yes, this is partly revenge for that loan denial. I won't lie about that. When someone slams the door in your face, it's natural to want to buy the whole building just to prove a point." The Demiur executives stared at him with expressions of profound confusion mixed with a hint of terror. "But here's the thing," Beaumont continued, his tone becoming more serious. "The value of this bank is directly tied to how good your species is at financial management. You've built something impressive here, a reputation for expertise that spans the galaxy. Why would we want to destroy that?" He gestured around the room, encompassing not just the financial department, but the entire institution they had built. "Humanity doesn't want to run another bank. We already have too many of them. We're good at making friends and occasionally excellent at making enemies, but interplanetary accounting, managing interstellar credit markets, hiding certain assets from tax authorities? Let's just say we have our own reasons for needing a bank run by people who know how to be creative with financial regulations." Zerar felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. The ambassador's casual mention of hiding assets and being creative with regulations suggested that Earth's acquisition of the bank wasn't entirely about revenge or even legitimate business expansion.
You're saying,
Zerar began slowly,
that humanity needs us to keep doing exactly what we've been doing?
"Pretty much," Beaumont confirmed. "Everyone keeps their jobs. Everyone stays on the planet. Nothing really changes except the name on the ownership documents. We need a bank that can handle, let's call them, questionable financial arrangements. And frankly, your species has already built the perfect infrastructure for that kind of work." Relief flooded through Zerar like a warm wave, though it was quickly followed by a new and perhaps more unsettling realization. If humanity hadn't bought the bank primarily for revenge,
and they specifically wanted the Demiurge to continue their current practices, then what exactly were Earth's questionable financial arrangements? What kind of assets did they need to hide? What regulations required such creative interpretation? The more Zerar thought about it, the more he realized that revenge might actually have been the less frightening motivation. But as he looked around at his colleagues, their expressions shifting from despair to cautious hope, he decided that some questions were better left unasked. At least for now, they would keep their jobs, their homes, and their planet. Whatever humanity's true motives, whatever dark financial schemes they might require assistance with in the future, those were problems for another day. Today, the Demiurge had learned that sometimes the species you underestimate become the ones who end up owning everything you hold dear. But they had also learned that, on rare occasions, that might not be the worst thing that could happen to a displaced species trying to rebuild their civilization among the stars. Even if it did mean working for the galaxy's most mysteriously well-funded species, with all the questions and complications that arrangement would inevitably bring.